The poem we'll be doing today is going to be the poem we're doing next week, next recording session again. In other words, we'll be doing it in two parts. And I dare say it's one of the most famous of American poems, certainly one of the most famous of all 20th century poems by the American poet Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that passing there, had worn them really about the same, and that both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And I repeat, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, as I said, this is one of the most popular poems that people are familiar with. But it's not a simple poem, not at all. It's Frost himself called this poem a tricky poem. It's kind of unclear and can be read in a number of different ways as to what the poet is really saying. I'm not going to really go into that. For those interested, of course, you can read the literature, do the search on the internet, and find many, many articles on it. I am interested in this poem as a poem for Elul. And the question is, in Elul is always the question. We stand before the day of judgment. We reconsider our past. We consider what our future will be like. But can we, in fact, ever come back? Can we change the past? Does not the arrow of time fly in only one direction? To echo the poet, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Way leads on to way. We're determined by our past. And indeed, while the poet asks the question, I doubted if I should ever come back, if I will ever do it, but you could always go back and walk back on a road and go on to the other road. That theoretically one could do. But the question is, in life, when I consider myself and my actions, can I really ever come back? And perhaps the question is, I doubted if I could ever come back. Is it possible at all? Am I fooling myself? What is involved? So this is a central question that we should be considering during Elul. And while Frost had inscribed on his tombstone, I had a lover's quarrel with the world, I would say that I have a lover's quarrel with Frost and his doubts. And let me explain. Certainly, in light of Elul, I have that quarrel. Life, if we be simple about it, is composed of acts that I do, what I do, and who I am. And in the who I am, we're talking about not the name, but the character. What do we mean when we talk about the character of Ebner? This is what the philosophers call virtue. In other words, there are things that I do, and there's a state of being which is either virtuous or not virtuous. We call good character and bad character. And how acts and character blend with each other is a central question in life. But it's not only a question of how my actions and my character blend, whether my acts truly reflect my character and vice versa, but it's a question whether my acts have a certain degree of consistency, whether my character traits have a degree of consistency. And so you can think of the question that I've posed as the question of A, B, C. Acts blended with character. Acts blended together, character blended together, character traits, virtues blended together, and acts and character blended with each other. And the question of whether or not one is really capable of blending is indicated by the poet who wants to go down both roads at the same time. But a person can't go down both roads at the same time. And the poet says, and sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler. The question is, and when you're blending your virtue and your acts, or just various acts, is it always the same one that is involved in this movement, in this action, in this life? In Yiddish, there's a saying that you can't dance at two weddings at the same time. You could go serially to one wedding and to another wedding, but you can't dance at two weddings at the same time. This issue of the blending of the inside and the outside, if you will, that which is visible and that which is invisible, because it's inside me, the character traits, is perhaps alluded to in that decree of Rabbi Gamliel, when he was the head of the academy in Yavne, that students would not be accepted, would not be allowed into the Beit Midrash if their toch, if their inside was not like their outside. Kol mi shein tocho kivaro al yikones lebeit midrash. Anybody who does not truly representative of what he really is, who doesn't perhaps act in the way his inside is, or perhaps whose inside is not truly reflected when you look at what he does. And inside he could be seething with anger, but outside he acts calm. The Rambam in Hilchot Deot, in the first chapter of the laws of qualities or characteristics, what we call in Hebrew midot, it's really about the issue of virtue. The Rambam says that there is actually a mitzvah of having a balanced state of character traits, which is at the midpoint between two extremes. One should not be overly generous, giving away everything that he has, and one should not be stingy. One should always be in what is often referred to as the middle path. And the Rambam actually says that the halachic basis, the legal basis, the Torah basis for this being the character trait, the virtue we should have, is actually a mitzvah, and the mitzvah is that we are supposed to go in the way, or if you will, in the road, in the way of God. And the Rambam, V'halachta b'drachav, quotes a saying of the rabbis, which appears in various forms, and the Rambam takes a particular form. The Rambam formulates it following the following formulation. Mahu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God is called merciful, gracious, Rachum, V'chanun, Erechapayim, all character traits of the 13 midot, the 13 attributes, so-called attributes of God. And we are to learn from this, Mahu Nikra Rachum, as God is called Rachum, Af Ata, so you, man, persona, Heye Rachum, you must actually be Rachum. In other words, when we apply character traits to God, it's a metaphor. And there's a philosophical reason for speaking that way, which we can't get into now. But nonetheless, you, a human being, must be, and that's a mitzvah, you must be merciful. You must be a merciful person. You must be a kind person. You must be a person of loving kindness, and so on and so forth, through 13 particular qualities. And the Rambam formulates this as the halachic legal definition of this positive commandment. The Rambam, Maimonides, returns to this theme again of character traits and notes in the laws of tshuva, in the seventh parak, in the seventh chapter, the Rambam notes the following. He says, do not think that doing tshuva, repenting, is changing what you've done or regretting what you've done. However, it's far beyond that. He says, as a person has to repent, to return from doing things wrong, a person has to examine carefully character traits, inner visions, inner realities that he might have. And to do tshuva, min hakas, from anger that I feel, min ha'eva, from hate that I harbor, min hakina, from jealousy, and so on and so forth. Min hakol tzarich lachzor b'tshuva, from all of these character traits, unbalanced character traits, a person has to do tshuva, and he says, ve'elu ha'avonot, these sins of virtue, or lack of virtue, kashim me'oton sheyesh be'emasa, they're much more difficult to repent from. Why? Shebizman she'odam nishka bahem, because when a person is sunk into them, he's so accustomed to being that way, kashahu lifrosh mehem, it is very, very hard and difficult to abandon them. And in the 5th chapter of Hilchot Tshuva, when Rambam discusses the whole issue of free will, he asserts, in an absolute sense, Anybody can be a tzaddik, righteous, or a rasha, or wicked. And then he goes to list character traits that anybody can work on, to change, to improve. The Vilna Gaon says on a pasuk in Mishlei, "Hachazek b'musar," hold fast to musar. Musar, ethical kind of. Al teref, don't let it slip from your grasp. Kihi chayecha, that's your life. And the Gaon says, what does that mean? It means, and I'm quoting, the Gaon says, it means kimash adam chai, that which man is alive, is kedei lishbor hamida, to break, to transform, to better the quality shalosh shavar hina, that he hasn't broken and transformed and made whole. We make whole sometimes by breaking. V'lochein tzarich adam tzarich tamid litchazek. And that's why a person always has to litchazek, to make himself strong, to keep going, to be better. Ve'im lo yitchazek, and if he doesn't do that, lama lo chayim. What's the point of life? What's the point of life? And nonetheless, if we continue in Perek Zayin, in the 7th Perek of Hilchot Tshuva, the Rambam says, we often despair. We despair because we can't change. We can't change. We can't change the past. We've done what we've done and we've been what we've been. And the Rambam says that's the whole point of Tshuva. And he waxes eloquent, beautifully beyond words about you can go back. You can be one traveler and you can be back on the other road. You have to do tshuva. You have to feel tshuva. You have to do it inside, in the presence of God. And that is the miracle. That is the essence of what tshuva is. If Thoreau writes at the beginning of Walden that most men lead lives of quiet desperation, I'll just amend that for our little talk today. And that is, most men who think they can't change, who can't better themselves, lead lives of quiet contradiction. And the contradiction is something that creates despair. I am what I am. We can be better. We can change. Tshuva tells man, don't despair. Contradictions can be overcome, and that overcoming of the contradiction will make all the difference. And that will make all the difference. And this is my lover's quarrel with Frost. There is no point in life that you can't change, because the road analogy, as beautiful as it may be, means that every moment of my life I can choose, and I do choose, to be and to do something. Now, every moment of my life can be a continuation on a different road, or a continuation without thinking and without consideration on the same road. But it's a decision that I make. And now is the time to make it. And now another moment went by, and now is the time to make it.